Is it easy to rig an election in this country? That's a question that is being asked by a great many people in media. Of course, most of those who are in media are working as appendages of the Democrat Party, and they say, "Oh no, 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 America's a safe and honest place, and we don't have that sort of thing going on here very often." What do you think this is? You think this is Chicago 1960? Well, you look who runs Chicago now. All I'm going to tell you, folks, is that historically we've had issues with that in the United States of America, and all of your politicians out there who proclaim, even your Democrats, a lot of them will proclaim their fealty to the Constitution, and they have to do it often right when they're sworn into office, and yet they don't really believe it. They don't really mean it. It's all about getting power and holding power and rewarding all of your friends. And I bring this up because there was a story today that just out of one South American country alone. Apparently, there is a story of all places, the New York Times. The New York Times had this story. I happened to come across this while doing some show prep today. That one country alone has about 56,000 people who are here in this country illegally. They were tracked down by our government, and our government delayed their extradition. And I'm sure they were told, hey, by the way, if you'd like to vote in this year's presidential election, here's a six-pack and a box lunch. We'll make sure that you get a good lunch and you can get a bit of a buzz on afterwards. Just go down there and vote for this list of people. That's how it's often being done. I also wanted to mention, because we don't have these problems so much in Idaho, simply because the Democrats could caucus in a closet. I think we're all aware of that. Most likely a water closet. That's where they belong generally. Well, that's where you find that sort of stuff, is in the water closet. Times News has a candidate forum taking place at the Magic Valley Arts Council. That's going to be at 195 River Vista Place in Twin Falls. Senate candidates for Districts 24 and 25 at 6 o'clock tonight. 7 o'clock, the House of Representatives candidates for District 24. I want to point out there's also one of these coming up for some of the county candidates tomorrow. That'll be taking place as well, and that's going to be over at the same building that houses Elevation 486. That'll be taking place there. We'll talk a little bit more about this. Steve Millington is set to join us in about 20 minutes. He'll be in studio from 8:30 to 9 o'clock. I don't have confirmation yet, but I also believe that Prosecutor Grant Loebs will be seeing us this morning just after the 9 o'clock news. We've got a lot to talk about with him as well. There's a story out this morning also that so much effort has been, well, we say so much effort has been made at our southern border, but that we also have people now who may be crossing illegally in droves at our northern border, which means they could be entering places like Idaho very quickly. Some of them could not mean us well. They could mean us harm. And this is the dilemma that we're faced with in this country right now. We don't really know who the bad guys are. Even Hillary Clinton, even though she won't say it publicly, in the leaked emails, it became apparent that even she was concerned that we have ne'er-do-wells entering the United States because we don't have a very good vetting process. She won't say it publicly, though, because way back in the year 2000, the Muslim vote in this country was primarily Republican. Now it is overwhelmingly Democrat. In other words, yeah, you come here and bomb the country all you want as long as you vote for us. And so they're turning out in droves to vote for the Democrats because they know the Democrats are the party of, well, we'll let you get away with anything. Well, you heard John Podesta say that he thought that it was a shame that the shooter in San Bernardino didn't have a name like Smith, Jones, or Hayes, I guess it was. And that it could have been better if there'd been someone reporting on the story instead of Chris Hayes at MSDNC. If it had been a guy with a Muslim name reporting on it, and that it had been a white Christian who'd done the shooting. The Democrats were disappointed by that because they thought, oh, geez, now we can really infiltrate their churches. The only major institution they haven't captured yet in this country. They want to have a wedge between you and God. Well, it was all foretold. We know that much, and we know our guy wins in the end. If you've been down Washington Street in Twin Falls, I love the sign that's outside the First Baptist, well, it's a Southern Baptist church there at the corner, one of the lights. And it mentions it doesn't really matter who's going to be president because Jesus is still going to remain the king. You Democrats out there, when you're burning in hell forever, or you're in the water closet, I guess there's some similarities between the two places. Hell may be one giant water closet. When you're burning there forever, maybe you can think about the things you did on earth, but you won't be able to warn people like yourselves. So, it would behoove you to straighten out and fly right now, but we realize that isn't going to happen. I've got a ton of material in front of me today. We won't be getting to all of it. But speculation about whether elections are actually being rigged in this country, and the Politico, they're horrified over there because that is definitely, way back in 2008, when the mother of one of the editors accused her son of being in the tank for Barack Obama, he wrote an editorial he gave a two-word response to his mother. So what? I kid you not. Yeah. So, yeah, because, transformation will change there, and we liberals know it's best for the country because we're the smart, we're reporters. That means we're the smartest people around, right? Hey, yeah. We're curing cancer and building rockets in our spare time. Media, you talk about the size of the egos. Oh, boy. And yet, most of them can't tie their own shoes. But I have a number of actual factual backing here that would show us that this indeed does go on in this country. Donald Trump is gaining ground. Apparently, according to polls, Politico says this, as he's going around the country saying that this election is rigged in favor of Hillary Rotten Clinton. And even some people who don't always agree with Donald Trump. I'll put it this way. George Will, the so-called conservative columnist, George Will does not believe in the Second Amendment, I should point out, and yet somehow still is allowed to call himself a conservative. George Will despises Donald Trump. But appearing on Fox News last night, Will was saying this. He was saying that Trump is right to one degree when he talks about rigged elections. I want you to take a listen.
George, thoughts?
Well, when Mr. Trump talks about it being rigged, he sweeps all his grievances into one big puddle. He talks about the media, he talked about the primaries, he talked about the polls, talked about the Republican National Committee. I think when most Americans hear that an election's rigged, they think of government action to rig the election. And there, Mr. Trump has a point if he would just make it more clearly. It is hard to think of an innocent reason why Democrats spend so much time, energy, and money, scarce resources all, resisting attempts to purge the voter rolls, that is, to remove people who are dead or otherwise have left the jurisdiction. It's hard to think of an innocent reason why they fight so tremendously against voter ID laws. They say, well, that burdens the exercise of a fundamental right. The Supreme Court has said that travel is a fundamental right. No one thinks that showing an ID at the airport burdens that fundamental right. We know, we don't surmise, we know that the 2010, 12, and 14 elections were rigged by the most intrusive and potentially punitive institution of the federal government, the IRS. You can read all about it in Kim Strassel's book, The Intimidation Game. She's familiar to all Wall Street journalists and Fox viewers. So this is not a surmise, and I have talked to lawyers in a position to know they say it's still going on, that the IRS is still intolerably delaying the granting of tax-exempt status to conservative advocacy groups to skew the persuasion of this campaign.
So we're not wrong. And then I was reading last night online that there are about 450 right now cases of voter fraud that are being prosecuted in this country. Those are what we know of, that we've actually found, that we've actually caught. But if you know that that's just the tip of the iceberg, you've got tens of thousands of people out there voting. There's some history to this. Wesley Pruden, former editor-in-chief of the Washington Times, he's now retired but still writes a regular column. And he gives us a little history about how this works in this country. Illinois held the key to the 1960 presidential election, and he said even many Democrats agree today that Illinois stole the election for John Kennedy over Richard Nixon. Now, Nixon lost by, I think it was 176,000 votes, popular vote nationwide. It was that slender of a margin. Closest election for a president in the history of this country, I believe. Reporters later found 56 of the dead registered from a single residence. These are people who were supposedly voting. Mr. Nixon himself asked the New York Herald Tribune, a Republican newspaper, to suspend its investigation of the vote because, quote, the nation cannot afford a constitutional crisis. And yet he's considered the bad guy by mainstream media today because of some other happenings in his life as he was trying to protect the country from being burned down by the hippies. The 1960 vote was close in Texas, the writer says, where strange things happened by the hand of Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson and his friends. In one county, 6,138 votes were cast from a pool of only 4,895 registered voters. And it was overwhelming for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who, by the way, just happened to be running for president with LBJ as his vice presidential nominee. But banish the thought, you liberals would never do those types of things today. Those are your heroes. You would never condemn what they did. Here you go. Pat Buchanan asking, is the system rigged? And he says, you betcha. Consider big media, the elite columnists and commentators, the dominant national press, and the national and cable networks, say Fox. Unless, of course, you're watching Shepard Smith and that you think you were on MSDNC. Not in this writer's lifetime, says Buchanan, has there been such a blanket hatred and hostility of a presidential candidate of a major party. So what, they reply, we have a free press. Well, you know what, if you're willing to take my liberties away, maybe before we get to the Second Amendment, we can take away yours with the first. We'll start at the beginning. How's that? But in this election, big media have burst out of the closet as an adjunct of the regime and an attack arm of the Clinton campaign. Half a century ago, Teddy White wrote of the power and bias of the adversary press that sought to bring down Nixon. The power of the press, he wrote, is primordial. It sets the agenda of public discussion, and this sweeping power is unrestrained by any law. It determines what people will talk about and think about, an authority that in other nations is reserved for tyrants, priests, parties, and mandarins. Tyrants being, of course, the key there. Because tyranny, and I was explaining this in the pregame video I did on Facebook this morning, tyranny isn't always a guy who's hanging from his wrists in a dungeon somewhere. Tyranny can be very soft. It can be the IRS telling you, well, before we actually approve your group, for tax-exempt status, we're going to have your membership rolls. And then they come in, get your membership rolls, then they audit everybody involved. And, of course, your group decides we don't want to put up with this, so they don't go out there and they don't get involved in the political arena for that very reason. That's how it's working today, and that's what we're dealing with liberals in this country. We have to come to a decision soon. Are we going to allow it to continue, or are we going to stop the liberals in their tracks? I didn't say dead in their tracks, so all of you people out there who are screaming about how mean and nasty I am, I'm just telling you right now, if we continue down this road, if you see those people at those Trump rallies who the media and the Democrats despise, and I know that's redundant, but despise to such a great degree, there are millions of them. You don't want to make them mad. Let me make that clear. You make them angry, and it may be the last we ever hear of liberalism in this country. We will wipe it from the face of the planet. As I said the other day, if the devil raptured all of the liberals straight to hell tomorrow, would the world be a better place? There's a question you all have to ask yourselves. We've got a lot more coming up today. Steve Millington is joining us. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. We also expect Grant Loebs to join us for the next hour of the show. Of course, he's our county prosecutor. Got a lot to talk about with him about legal issues. He doesn't have an opponent coming up in November. Not that anybody takes that lightly, but it gives him a chance just to talk about the issues related to the legal system today versus campaigning. All those things on the way. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, and it's 38. Yes, it'll warm up again sometime soon. I don't know, maybe July. I just got a message from a friend of mine. The liberals don't like it, or some of Neil's old friends don't like it. They complain bitterly about the fact that I'm writing a newspaper column in the Times News, which appeared today. I have a friend, and I used to work with him. He is the public address announcer for the New York Yankees. All right, he's working for something that's evil, but he's a pretty decent guy. He's a traditional Catholic. And he says it's simply the best thing he's ever read when he saw the column today. And so... Also, a friend of mine, he's the commander of the American Legion in his, I think his state now. And he wrote me, he said, don't worry about your critics. They should step on a landmine. He has an apple orchard and promised to send me some apples. So I'll be kind to him because he grows something called crispins, or they're better known as, I guess, matsus. Absolutely delicious, and I can't find them at any of the local grocery stores. Wanted to mention, if I could, 38 right now. It is cold, and a lot of people are just trying out that furnace to see if it works. If you've got some issues, I had to put new batteries in my thermostat the other day just because it had been so long since I used it. We all have things that need to be checked like that before we get into the really bitter cold weather. If you've got trouble, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. The team at Ramsey's will make sure that they'll come out. Well, they'll make sure the job's done right when they do the repairs or improve the efficiency, and they'll make sure it's done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. Can reach our program today by dialing 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Look, we'll take all of your telephone calls today. Some guy was upset with me last week, but it wasn't with what he was saying. I cut him off simply because he started shouting over me. That's usually a liberal trick, and I'm always surprised when it comes from a conservative. They feel, well, I win an argument by being the loudest. No, you don't. You win an argument by giving a point and refuting the other points and doing it well. And so, therefore, as long as you're polite when you're on the line, I'll be polite too. But the screamers, got no time for you. Leave the screaming to the professionals. Speaking of people who are actually very sedate, Steve Millington in the studio with us this morning as well, the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:26. As I mentioned just quickly at the top of the program, we were talking about, and you talked about it during the break with me, candidate forum tonight taking place.
That's correct. Excuse me. I have to get my speaking voice back here. The Times News is hosting a candidate forum at the Magic Valley Arts Council building, and that, by the way, is located in the Elevation 486 building out there on the canyon rim. They have two sections. The senatorial candidates will face off at 6 p.m., and the House of Representative candidates will face off at 7 p.m. And that's tonight in the Elevation 486 building. So you got all the candidates from districts 24 and 25. So that those candidates will be in attendance, and you can have a great conversation with the Times News is going to host it and moderate the discussion. I have not heard whether or not they're going to be taking any visitor attendance, audience participation, or whether all of the questions are predetermined. But it'd be a great opportunity to go become much better acquainted with candidates and their responses to Times News questions.
I wanted to point out, for some of us, it's maybe 500 steps to go to that tonight. But if I don't get a nap in, I may not make it. So, I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning. But it's it's easy to get to from really anywhere in the area. Because
it's not a difficult thing. The parking is quite generous in front of those buildings.
Right off North Washington, near the end of North Washington.
Plenty of parking there, and a great opportunity to just catch up and make sure you got everything lined up. Now, I think there is another candidate forum Wednesday night. It seems like to me it said it was over in Gooding, but I'm not sure.
That's for state candidates, right?
But yeah. So that'll be.
I think I saw something from Jack Johnson, too, that some of the county candidates are having a forum somewhere this week.
I haven't heard about that one, so I'm at a loss there.
Now, what happens? Because in some of these races, there simply are no Democrats who are challenging. Does the Republican just get to make a case and present, but there's nobody there to argue with?
The question may be addressed to the candidates for office, and they will get responses from everybody that's on the page. Even though you may not have an opponent in the race, they will still want to ask your question or get your answers to the various questions.
No, there are some people I may not agree with among the Democrats, and I think of Mrs. Talkington, for instance, who's running for a state legislative seat. But that doesn't mean I don't respect her intelligence. So you should get a pretty good and I think polite give and take between the candidates.
Well, and I would hope that we by having these candidate forums, one of the hopes, one of the objectives is that we begin to recognize differences of ideologies and differences of approach to governing that each candidate would bring to the position that they might be elected to. And so we read lots of stuff in the newspaper and the letters to the editors and all of the. Sometimes it's real interesting just to go listen to these on the spot conversations.
And she married a broadcaster, by the way, so she can't be all bad.
Now, wait a minute. Let's not get carried away here, Bill.
That meant she had to go actually make the real living, but
yeah.
It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and Steve Millington will spend the next half hour with us. It's 37. Our temperature ping-ponging between there and 40 degrees already this morning, depending on which way the breeze is blowing.